which leads me to one of the things I really believe. And one of the reasons I'm doing this work is I love history. I'm a history buff. I was a history major. I've forgotten most of what I learned in college, but I fear that we have trouble putting today's challenges in historical context. So, for example, and you've heard this many times, this country has never been more divided than we are today. Really? The Civil War comes to mind. I'm reading Doris Kearns Goodwin's latest book, and when talking about the summer of 1968, if we think that the protests on college campuses today are concerning or extreme, I would challenge people to think back in our lifetime, at least my lifetime, to a summer like 1968. I think that's been helpful for my kids when the latest conflicts in the Middle East started. It's very obviously a huge concern and it's a scary situation. But when you've lived through others in the past and you realize this is not something new under the sun, I think that helps our kids put things in perspective. So that's part of it. I had Kevin Kelly on the show, and he has a line that I use every chance I get, which is, if you only read the news, you'll think things have never been worse. But if you read history, you'll realize things have never been better. And so
That's a good line.
It's one of my favorites, and I'm wearing it out, but it's something that I think has helped my kids because I always refer back to history when it makes sense, and it really does help put things into context.
My corollary to that line has been to say that never before have more human beings had more caloric affluence, physical security, legal rights, longevity, and better health, and never have more people been more pissed off. And it's one of the weird dichotomies or ironies. I don't know. Maybe it's not ironic, but it is certainly a phenomenon of our day. And I think part of it, I've tried to figure this out. Emma's tried to figure this out. I don't think we have a good answer to it, is that none of us live in history. So while it is absolutely true to point this out to people, and I continually write this way. I mean, I did a piece in the summer of 2020 when, of course, this was like both the heart of COVID and the depths of the George Floyd protests. And at that particular time, the comparisons with the summer of 68 were particularly high on people's minds. And I was trying to say, look, even as bad as that period of time was in 2020, it still, in my view, wasn't nearly as chaotic and divisive as the summer of 68. I do respect the degree that it requires effort to live historically. It's not intuitive. It's not natural. I mean, maybe it is in certain traditional cultures where they're constantly invoking the ancestors in the past, and there's a greater degree of nurtured connection to the past. But we're not like that. And I grapple, and I wonder whether you're finding this at all as you do the, hey, wait a minute, right? Like, hey, wait a minute, look at the past. That it is often not as effective as you think it would be, because it forces people into a zone that they're just, we haven't culturally made ourselves in, which is to think of ourselves in a continuum rather than ever present.
Yeah, I think that puts it well. Not everyone enjoys history the way I do, reads it, reflects on it. And also, these are challenging times. There are tough things going on. I interviewed Adam Mastroianni, who's a brilliant guy who writes on the subject of sort of mental games that we play with ourselves. And he says, people say these are unprecedented times. And he said, guess what? Every human being has lived in unprecedented times. Every generation is experiencing things that are unprecedented by definition. And so, yeah, there's things we're going through that we've never gone through before, but there are definitely echoes and corollaries in history. But yeah, it's absolutely a challenge. And it's also a challenge. I'm sure you face this when people say, okay, fine, but that was 1968, but this is a real problem. Like, yeah, it is. But let's start with some context. Let's take a deep breath. I was honored to give a high school graduation speech 2 Junes ago. So the challenge was, addressing a bunch of 18-year-olds who just want to get to the party, and this old guy up there telling them about optimism. And one of the things I talked about, I'll date myself, but I graduated from high school in 1984. And so I did my research to make sure I had it right. So first thing I said was that 1984 was not as bad as the hopelessly pessimistic George Orwell thought it would be. But also, when we were sitting there graduating, we had apartheid, we had the Cold War, we had the Soviet Union and the United States boycotting each other's Olympics. We had, when it comes to the environment, we had acid rain and the ozone layer. So I said to them, look, we've whiffed on climate change to a large degree, but everything I just listed was checked off in the years since I graduated. Oh, AIDS. AIDS was rampaging in 1984. I don't even think we'd given it that name at that point. And my point to them was these didn't just get fixed because we're all optimists and just, look to the skies and things got better. People researched, they marched, they voted. When I got to college, the protests were about divesting in South Africa. So that sort of historical context is helpful. I also told them, on my dad's side of the family, my grandfather left college and went to World War I. His son left high school and went to World War II. His brother, my dad, left college and went to Korea. Coming to my generation, my brother missed the Vietnam draft by 3 years. And, conscription is not something even on the minds of these people I'm giving speeches to. So I wear it out, but I think it's important to do it and remind people that just how well we have it on so many regards.
My favorite historical example when this gets brought up is I was in The Hague a few months back, and there was a statue commemorating Johan de Witt, who most people don't know about. Johan de Witt died because he was involved in the politics at the time over there in the Netherlands, and he was carried off by an angry crowd and eaten alive.
Oh, dear.
And I always think to myself, like, there are a lot of messy political things happening these days, but like that is not something that's
not on our radar. Yeah, no, the caning of Sumner is always my favorite example. Before the Civil War, this guy gets bludgeoned in the House of Representatives.
Representative Brooks.
Right? He was unscathed. It was just, the guy deserved it.
They were separated.
That was exactly. Go to your corners.